Listen, listen, listen. You can never do too much listening. I have a chart on my wall in my office that says leadership communication tool, and it's a guy standing at a counter, and everything on the shelf are ears. I think if I was going to hand out the best leadership tool possible, it would be to take some duct tape and give it to them to put over their mouths so that all they have are ears to communicate. But one of the major flaws we have as leaders is we're very busy. We have a lot going on. So we have a tendency to not listen to people, not pay attention in meetings because we've just got all this stuff going on in our heads all the time. You have to be a conscious listener. Listening doesn't happen by accident. You have to force yourself to pay attention, listen to what people say, how they say it, what is it they're trying to communicate. Are they trying to communicate exactly what they're saying, or are they really trying to tell you something else? You have to ask questions so they can clarify. You have to really nurture and develop your listening skills if you're going to be a good leader, because you should be doing 90% listening and 10% talking. And I think a lot of leaders do 90% talking and 10% listening. And that's a fatal error that you can make as you move up the chain of command and get more and more responsibility. Give yourselves opportunities to listen by meeting with your folks, having skip levels, having, barbecues, having potlucks, talking to people in the cafeteria, talking to people at Home Depot. I do a lot of talking to employees when I'm at Costco and Home Depot. I run into people and, while you're here, let me tell you this. And you'd be surprised what you learn by listening and how much you don't learn by not listening. I think for me, I tend to have a very short attention span. So I have trouble in meetings, especially when they go long. So I'm always having to consciously say to myself, okay, Carol, listen, pay attention to what people are saying. Try not to flip through the charts that people have given you and get ahead of them. Stay on track, pay attention to what they're saying, ask questions and clarify what they mean by what they're saying. And you'll just do way better as a leader in making your decisions and understanding problems, understanding people, picking up on employee issues. If you talk to somebody and you're sensing something's going on with them non-verbally, you need to stop and say, gee, is something happening? Is everything okay? Then you're going to find out their mother's dying, their wife has got cancer. You're going to find out all this pertinent data that you need to manage the people and to understand that, especially in a facility where you work with explosives. You want to know what's going on with your employees. You want to know they're okay. And when they're not okay, you want to put them on operations that are safe for them if their mind is not going to be on work, if they are going to be preoccupied with the health of a loved one or a child being sick and in the hospital and things like that. So you would be just totally amazed what you can learn by just listening to people and watching their nonverbal language and picking up on what they're trying to tell you. The other is you need to encourage people to tell you what you need to hear, because you have to encourage people to talk to you and tell you things, especially the higher up you get in management. People are less likely to tell you things. They're less likely to bring things to your attention, not more likely. And so if you're not making people feel like you're approachable, if you're not trying to pull information from people to help them feel comfortable talking to you, then you're going to hear only what they want you to hear, and you're not going to be told what you need to know, and you're going to fail. And you'll fail and you'll wonder, why did I fail? Why didn't they tell me? I don't understand. I'm approachable. I'm a good person. They ought to be able to trust me. Those are things you earn. You don't get those just because you got a manager title. You have to earn to be somebody that they want to tell. And I think that's one of the biggest flaws we see in Lockheed Martin today is people aren't telling their bosses what they need to hear. And even when they do tell them what they need to hear, they're not listening. So there isn't anything worse than not listening.
You know, Carol,
Make sure you speak loud enough.
absolutely. And I can think of, and we can all think of managers that listened and managers that didn't. And I can think of a time when I've probably said something or explained something to a manager or a base manager, and it was either thrown back in my face, or it was mocked, or it was used against me later. I guess I want to get your feeling as far as our process we have for recruiting management. Is listening one of those things that we say, gee, how is that a skill set we're looking for? Is that maybe even a selection criteria? How well is this person? And then the other question is, can you even teach somebody to actively listen? Just simply saying, gee, you need to actively listen doesn't really do the job. I think they have to learn it by having failed at something. That significant emotional event, that they go, wow, if I'd have been listening, I would have been able to catch that issue. But could you address those?
I think if you go look at the formal selection criteria for leadership, listening is not one of the categories. They do put in their interpersonal skills and ability to communicate, which is supposed to encompass listening. I'm not sure we emphasize listening enough when we're considering candidates for jobs. I think you're right. I think it's something that should have more emphasis on it. I think even if you look at the leadership spectrum, I don't know if anybody's gone into the Lockheed website and looked at leadership spectrum, but you won't find listening in there, which is kind of an interesting thing. It's almost like everybody assumes you listen. It's kind of like they assume you're going to be honest, because you don't see honesty as one of the criteria either. They just assume you listen. They just assume that you talk. But listening is a skill, and it's a skill that you can learn to do better. But it's got to be conscious learning. It's exercise. It is not something that you just have. There are people that are better listeners than others just naturally, but I don't think anybody is an exceptional leader unless they actually work at being an exceptional listener. As far as leaders that throw things in your face or leaders that don't listen, that's my whole point about why programs fail, is because leaders don't listen. And all of us have had leaders that didn't listen. I kind of have a joke with my kind of inner core team is when we're communicating to Sunnyvale is usually Sunnyvale doesn't hear it until you've told them at least 5 times. I think, Gary, you've been in meetings where I've said, well, that was the 3rd time we told them. So the other part on the other side of communicating is don't assume the person heard you just because you told them. You have to keep telling them until you hear them say it back to you. And then you've known. Then you know they've heard you. Then you know they finally listened to what you were saying. And sometimes you got to package it up 4 or 5 different ways and say it 4 or 5 different ways before they finally it connects and they say, "Oh, you mean this?" And so, unfortunately, there are bad leaders out there. So you need to work with them and try to help them to learn to listen to you. And if they don't, it's not a lot you can do other than to keep telling them. But yeah, there's a lot of risk involved in trying to tell your boss what they need to hear, especially if they're not the kind of person that's willing to hear what they should hear.
So would you say that's a direct result of that is the lack of information coming up to managers?
Absolutely. That's why you have to earn it. That's why you have to encourage it. It isn't automatic just because you have a title. It isn't automatic just because you think you're a good person. It doesn't happen automatic at all, ever. It has to be encouraged. It has to be nurtured. It doesn't just happen because you're a good person, you think you're approachable, you think that you're nice, you think that, it does not happen automatically. You got to earn it, You gotta work it, you gotta nurture it, you gotta become proficient at it. I can't tell you how many times I'm in a meeting and I'll say, okay, Carol, just stop and listen. I try not to, and in some meetings I won't even take a copy of the pitch. Because I'm like, no, don't give me a copy, because then I won't pay as much attention. So, I'm not gonna open the pitch. I'm gonna listen to what you're telling me. And so understand how you listen, where your deficiencies are. If any of you are married, there's a person around you that can give you a lot of feedback on that skill set. Your best friends can give you good feedback on that skill set. Your best friends at work can give you feedback on that skill set. So if you think you're a good listener, ask a few people that are around you all the time. Gee, am I a good listener? And they'll tell you all the things that you do that cause you not to listen well. And it's amazing. Am I a good listener? No. Do I try to be a good listener? Yes. Do I work at it every day? Absolutely. So hopefully you'll all do the same. Anything more on listening? The other problem that you have is there are certain people who have right brains. I was in a class one time and they were talking about the differences between men and women, and they were talking about communication. And the guy used a explanation was that women typically get up in the morning and they have 25,000 words that they have to use per day. So you have to go through a lot of words to get what you need when you're communicating sometimes with people who tend to be communicative, where other people, they only have like 25 words, and so you'll say, how was your day, dear? And you'll say, fine. So recognize too that sometimes it's hard to listen because the person goes through all of this information and you're like, okay, are we gonna get there? My big fault is because I can't listen that long. My friends and family have learned to say, okay, Carol, if I give you the bottom line, will you listen to the story? So they kind of negotiate with me. And I'll say, okay, tell me the bottom line and then I'll listen to the story. So they'll tell me, here's the answer, here's the result, here's the problem. Let me tell you the story, and they'll go through their story. And so that's why I know I'm not a really good listener, because people have to work around my listening skills.
See, I heard for women it was 50,000 words a day, and for men it's 25,000, but it's really, the rationalization is that women have to tell men everything twice.
Ah, I see. Anybody have any experiences in learning listening skills?
The hardest thing is to not come up with the answer when somebody's telling you something until you've heard everything they have to say. And so it's hard not to do that, because you always want to help them. They come to you and you want to help them quickly. You need to listen to the whole story first, and that's kind of hard to do.
It is. Yeah. When you stop them halfway before they get there, and you say, "Oh, but you mean this," because you're wanting to get to the answer. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. Pay attention to your behavior, and you'll find that you're not as good a listener as you thought.